Hey everyone, we're back with another episode of the Utility Strategy Podcast. And today we're going to have a very interesting conversation, an unfiltered one, about the risk of subsurface utilities from the perspective of the different stakeholders involved in infrastructure projects. So without further ado, Syd Jones, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thank you, David, for having me.
Yeah, sure. So give our audience some context. Who are you? What are you up to? What does your company do?
Well, again, my name is Syd Jones. I'm a estimating consultant, and my career entails about 28 years, up to 28 years, and counting. Uh, Essentially, just helping clients with water, wastewater utility estimating, heavy civil, highway transportation, those types of things. Basically, infrastructure. Started out in the water wastewater industry, and then quickly dovetailed into the transportation industry, both in California and in Arizona, in those areas. And over a period of time, it just kind of shifted to more of a national scale where I worked corporate for about a good chunk of 25 years. And then 5 years ago in 2017, decided that I would do something on my own and figured that my resources and my talents would be better used if I did this independently and facilitate a lot of the clients that I used to work for. So facilitate their needs and augment their estimating resources and their departments that currently exist. And the great thing about the industry today is we've got a labor shortage, and that includes in management as well. So there's definitely some security, job security, and my talents have been out there for other clients to look at from a global standpoint, from a national standpoint, from a state and local standpoint. So that's essentially what I do. Decided to do estimating on my own and keep my relationships and my networking going. And currently I've got over half a dozen clients that I regularly work for. And I'm sure that we'll have an opportunity to talk a little bit about some of their instances that they get into that they would give me a call and I could help them out.
Yeah. Give us some perspective. What is like when you are approached by a client, by a customer, and they say, "Hey, we've got this project going on. We've got this highway, this pipeline." What does that look like? You go into a project. What are you looking for? Which risks are you planning to take on, and how do you mitigate them?
Well, typically, most of the work that I get involved in is going to be a competitive bid, so that you've got a lot of public works agencies that are letting out plans and projects, whether it's through TxDOT or Caltrans or a multitude of local mud districts that they'll publicly advertise on certain websites, and also they'll have their own website that you can kind of tap into and kind of monitor and you know track a lot of the jobs that a lot of these agencies are letting out. And then what
Yeah.
will happen? There'll be an intersection between the clients that I have that are general contractors. They'll be looking at jobs that I'm kind of tracking, and then I might get a phone call that says, "Hey, we're going to need some help on such and such job, and are you familiar with it? Can you give us a hand with X, Y, and Z, whether it's utilities or whether it's roadway, dirt, bridges, whatever the case may be." So I'll get a call out of the blue, or I'll basically be networking with clients and ask them ahead of time, "Hey, you guys looking at a monthly letting for TxDOT, for example?" "Oh yeah, we are." "Well, you guys need any help?" "Sure." "Okay, well, I'll take on utilities if you want." "Okay." Or something else. They may say, "We've got the utilities covered. We need an earthwork takeoff, or we need help with the bridges, or we've got a wastewater treatment plant that nobody in our office can estimate. Can you help us out with that? We want to expand our markets," that type of thing. So a lot of it's cold calling, a lot of it is just networking. So I take a little bit of both. It's relatively 50-50.
Yeah. But I think that what's really special about the industry is that a lot is based on trust. A lot of the relationships are based on trust and uh, knowing who you can trust for which job. And we're seeing, I think, when we talk to our customers and when we talk to our friends in the industry, that's definitely a meaningful element of doing business in the industry. But going back to your work, when you take on a project, I think one of the challenges are around the subsurface utilities. That there's just so much missing information. And how does an estimator go into a job like that with a lack of data, a lack of information? Like you don't always know what you're up against. You never have the full story. And how do you estimate that? How do you quantify that challenge?
Well, certainly when you're dealing with something that's a competitive bid, which is design, bid, build, or a hard bid, a lot of the documentation has been provided, and I can't say that all the questions have been answered. I mean, that's kind of how you dovetail into change orders when you do get a job, or you can speculate change orders, forecast them, and maybe integrate those into your bid as part of your risk register. Are you going to have some windfalls? Are you going to have some downfalls? How does that how does that look in the bottom line when you're closing out a bid?
Yeah,
Design build work. You'll have a lot of situations. There'll be a lack of data. So those things, you're really relying on your expertise, your experience to know that. I've seen tons of utility lines put in over the years. Okay, I typically will know if the information's not given, what I'm looking at. Whatever whatever I can deduce from an existing, say for example, an existing manhole lid. We can do some field research and find out what the inverts are and kind of extrapolate information that's below ground that we might need to put together a complete bid on a design bid project. Now, when it comes to bid build or hard bid work, that information's pretty much given in completion by about 95% or more. And when there's not information that's needed, that's really easy to connect the dots when we're talking about a TxDOT job or a Caltrans job or something that's being let out in the public works. They've done their homework. They've done a lot of right-of-way acquisition. They've got as-built that they're working with. They've got utility information that either comes from Dig Alert or USA service or those types of things. As it pertains to utilities, the above grade stuff, that stuff you can visualize as well if it's not given, because if you try to find out it's kind of a puzzle. You find out what's given to you, and if there is a gap that you've got to fill, it's not too hard. They usually give you a plethora of information that you can fill in those gaps. Design build, it takes a little bit more, but the people I work with, a lot of the resources, a lot of the estimators that I work with in larger corporations, they've been doing this for years, like myself. So we can pretty much we've seen it before. We know how to get from point A to point B and fill in those gaps. But you're right, there is a challenge, and I think that whenever somebody calls me and hires Jones Industrial Group and our staff, we know enough about it. We've worked with a lot of these people that they trust us. They know our work, and they know that we can extrapolate that information. That we're not just making things up. And at the end of the day, it's got to make sense, because you're going to have a lot of eyes on a project, even on a pre-construction side. So there's checks and balances where if you don't know what you're doing, they'll find out immediately. So that's kind of in a nutshell how we'd proceed on the front end.
what I think though that we have a very experienced industry, and I think we have a lot of young engineers coming into the industry, and they don't have that experience, and yet because of the labor shortage, they are tasked with these riskful jobs to be done, if that makes sense. And I'm wondering how these big firms are taking on this risk.
Well, Obviously, when you have somebody coming from college and they're new, they're not just going to let them take the lead on a project, whether it's from the design standpoint or from an operation standpoint. They'll have people come alongside them. They're very seasoned, and they'll kind of cut their teeth along with, somebody that's a mentor to, get the information that's going to be viable. The owners that are hiring engineers or hiring contractors to do this work, especially on the design build side, they're doing their homework too. They're not just going to let you, have a clean slate and a blank checkbook and just come in and do anything you want to do. So there's definitely there's a changing of the guard, but I think that the ones who are up and coming, they're learning quickly. They're having to expedite that learning curve, and I think that with the older staff that's here now, that's going to be retiring soon, they're definitely trying to segue so that some of these young engineers can, handle it and run with the ball and not leave a lot of these owners hanging. Because again, they'll know immediately, and because you can draw a pretty picture. A lot of engineers, back in the day, they just love to draw these pictures and these pretty pictures, but the the idea that you could actually go and build that, those two things it seemed like there was an abyss between them in the past. Now I think that they're starting to integrate more of the common sense out in the field. So a lot of these engineers, send them out in the field, let them see this work being performed so that when they go back into the design room and start working on it in two dimensions, when they're just, throwing a bunch of lines on paper, it'll make more sense, because you can draw something, but the fact that can it be built or not, that's really what the owner is looking for, because you're wasting the owner's time, especially when it comes to billable hours and it's not a lump sum.
Yeah.
They definitely want you to be concise in your approach and get results and get answers quickly.
Yeah, talk to us a bit more about that. Like, what is especially in these heavy civil projects and design build projects, what is the owner looking for? Like, what are they expecting from the contractor who's taking on these are normally large projects.
Well, the owner, they're hiring engineers because it used to be that a lot of these owners, whether it's TxDOT or Caltrans or some of these other local municipalities, they have their own in-house engineering firms. And right now, resources are getting thin because a lot of people are retiring. The newer engineers aren't ready yet, and they don't have the season behind them to really deliver like an owner expects. So what they have to do is they have to go out and they'll hire these large engineering firms, and they'll use their staff that's experienced, kind of like the way they would hire me as a consultant, so that if they're lacking internally with their own resources, they lean on other engineering firms to provide the integrity of the project and to do it within a budget. When you have an in-house engineer, from your owner, from that standpoint, the problem in the past is you can just milk the clock, and there's a lot of money you can spend and bleed through and not getting any results. I think the owner's looking for engineering firms that can deliver, and if it's a lump sum, they have to deliver regardless. They have a deadline,
Yep.
so they're trying to save money because you're trying to protect the taxpayer interest, even when it's a design build. Typically a competitive bid, it's taxpayer dollars. Design builds, it's taxpayer money, but you start getting into some of these other entities where it can be private money and money that's allocated for something else that's not directly going to hit the taxpayer. But owners, again, are looking to augment their resources and get results quickly. Same thing on the contracting end. The owner's looking to start a relationship with the contractors so that, number one, they're going to deliver, and number two, they're going to do it in a timely manner where they're not just going to camp out on a job site, milk the project, get paid for it. Because it's really, bottom line is, it's about the money. And if you can save and keep your budgets and maintain your budgets, that's what it's all about. It doesn't matter if it's from the owner standpoint, designer standpoint, or a contractor standpoint. I mean, it's really the bottom line dollar. And I think that's why you're starting to see these different relationships outside of just trying to do it in house, because I think that there's been a lot of abuse And that's why these new models of doing business are starting to pop up and gain a lot of traction.
Yeah. I think though, when you look at it from the contractor side, or that, like we're hearing numbers like 5%, 7% margins for a project, and it's kind of become very difficult for contractors to build an organization and to build a professional organization with these types of numbers. And there's like a battle between these two stakeholders.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, the margins, the profit margins, especially for public works projects, bid build. I mean, razor thin. It doesn't matter if you're doing work in California or Texas or North Carolina or Utah or Colorado. I mean, typically, for in Texas, for example, I mean, it's a slugfest. If you can make 5% and bid your work at 5%, you're doing well. Now, design build's attractive because you can make anywhere from 5% to 25%. Just
Yeah.
depends on how the flow of the project goes. But yeah, competitive bid. I mean, it's good for the owner because they definitely want a lot of participation. You don't want to handpick certain contractors to do the work. I know that in some states like Texas, it's a good old boy network, and they leave things open ended where the owner can pretty much pick who they want to do the job, even in a competitive bid.
Yeah.
And that's fine. I mean, because you have to read the specs, you have to know what you're getting yourself into. I mean, that's why they hire me, because they know that, hey, should we even bid this job for this particular agency? Because can we get in? Do they know us? Are they gonna? You can get 9 bidders that are going to look at a job, but they're
Yeah.
really seriously only going to look at 1 or 2 because the owner knows them. Now, how do you get that experience? There's a lot of turnover in construction, so you may have you may have a good friend that works for company X one day, and the next day or 2 years later he's working for company Y that never could get their foot in the door with an agency in Texas, but because the owner of some utility mud district knows this guy from company Y, all of a sudden they're a player. So there's a lot of relationships, and again, states do matter. Um, Caltrans, for example, or California, across the board, they're very good about competitive bid, and if you've got a backhoe and a couple guys and a license that's legit with no liens against it, you can jump in as long as you're bonded. You can jump in and get in the fray, and you will be low bidder. Texas, for example, you can jump in, and it may take you a long time to get a gig. I have small clients in Texas that it took them 2 years to get on board to get their first job.
Wow.
So, I mean, I've tried personally in Texas to do it. And it's not what you know, it's who you know. And Texas isn't the only state. There's other states in the union that, that are that way. And, hopefully I'm answering your question, but I always feel like I'm going off on a tangent because a lot of personal stories I could tell about, the ins and outs of working in different states. And, in California, you're looking at unions you have to deal with. Right to work states like Texas and parts of Arizona, a lot different environment, a lot different atmosphere. So the delivery methods have a lot to do with your success in different states as well. Florida, for example, when you bid work in Florida, they have a lot of reciprocity rules where from county to county, depending on where the job site's at, if your corporate headquarters are located in an adjacent county that touches it, you can have different bid preferences and things of that nature. That's another can of worms because in the bid build competitive bid market, there are certain states that if you're not settled in and know the rules, you're just wasting your time. Florida is very mafioso. I mean, it's definitely you got to know what you're doing. You got to know how the rules of engagement work. Texas, on the other hand, just jump in, see what happens.
Yeah.
California, it's highly regulated. You can jump in and they're going to list you, but you better be able to deliver. So it's fun, the variety of different clients that I have all over the country. Whenever you're bidding a job in a certain state, getting right down to sales tax. When you bid work in South Carolina and North Carolina, when you're doing water wastewater work, if it touches water, it's a different tax rate, or if it's a different allocation on your permanent materials versus your consumables. When you go into Washington State, their tax codes and their tax structure is really messed up. It's very confusing. It's hard to bid work in Washington State. So it's kind of fun because it is a puzzle depending on where the job's going to be bid at, where it's going to be led at, and who your client is and who the owner is. So different rules of engagement. And I think that owners and contractors are looking for the right teams to put these things together that are familiar with the state that they're bidding in, the municipality, the owner, the engineer. All of these things have everything to do whether or not you're going to enter into trying to even bid a project, let alone capture it and go out and perform the work.
Yeah. Do you think that there's an element of consistency with the bid that you put together and the number of additional work that you have afterwards? Like we see this a lot with utility relocations. That like, okay, we surprisingly discovered this utility now right away, and now we got to move it, and now there's another change order that we put in place, and then the change orders start to pile up, and then eventually the owner isn't happy, right? Because you had this contractor bid for a certain number, right? But the reality turned into something completely different.
Well, certainly that happens. When it's hard bid and they give you the information, it's great for a contractor when you run into something that's not there, that
Yeah.
that wasn't on the plans, or it's there and it's not noted, or whatever the case may be. It's a changed condition. That's great. That's how a lot of these people that are in that 5% market can survive, is because of the change orders. Now, when you get in design build work, an owner really likes that because now I can lean on the contractor. Hey, look, you take all the risk. We're going to outline what the right of way is and what the general scope of work is going to be. You need to figure it out from point A to point B with you knowing and having knowledge of the intention of what the end result purpose of this project is. So even if you've got some schematic drawings or you've got some ideas of what they're trying to do, if it's different from that, it's still, the risk is all on the contractor. Now, again, you can enter in with your engineer. When you're employed with the engineer on a design build, you now become symbiotic in a relationship, because typically, like in a competitive bid market, engineers and contractors don't like each other. They just butt heads. And we think they don't know anything, and they think we don't know anything. So it's great because we're all on equal ground. We kind of hate each other. But in a design build, we have to put aside our differences and come together and figure out how to form this symbiotic relationship, because you're both going to live and die by your expertise. So now you've got to figure out how to make friends and get the job done. The owner likes that because he's like, look, guys, I've rewarded the project to you. I know it's going to cost, $1 billion. That's all you're going to get. So when you do run into something, it's up to you. Unless, of course, you negotiate some force majeure in your contract that, okay, look, this is definitely an act of God, something nobody, even on the design team or on the contracting side, could have figured out. And the owner, good owners will accommodate for that. But by and large, the owner's risk it's done. The only risk they're taking on is, do they have the budget? Do they have the $1 billion that they can pay out? Knowing that once that last check is written, they're done. So it's great for them.
What comes to mind is, why are we only seeing this with these mega projects? Like, why are we having design build for the smaller projects? Like, if the system works, right? I think that in TechStart it's 5 to 6 design builds in 2 years, something like that. And I think like when we look at the Caltrans, I'm not so educated on the numbers, but I think like when you look historically, it's more or less the same. And I'm wondering, like, why, like, we have these alternative delivery methods. Why aren't we implementing more of them?
It's money, because you, on the front end, if you've got these smaller projects where they're pretty easy conceptually to put on paper and go out and do, or at least get a price on them. an owner is not going to want to hire an engineer. Engineers are notorious for milking the clock. They'll definitely sit on something, and it's almost like they all collude and they dare I say that word?
Yeah.
They'll call each other and say, hey, this is basically going to be our scheduled values for design costs. I mean, I've seen some exorbitant design costs for what? And then, they could turn it around and they could say, well, you contractors, I mean, you nickel and dime for everything. I mean, I see both sides. Yeah. But owners see both sides too. They're looking at us. It's almost like a tennis game going on. You're looking at both sides and it's almost like a ball going over the net, back and forth. So if it's something that an owner can figure out, they'll use their internal resources, get the right-of-way acquisition, put it on paper, get it out, get it bid. They can save a lot of money on the front end. And that's why they don't have these smaller projects, especially when they have all the information, soup to nuts. They can get it out there and it's cheaper. Again, trying to protect the taxpayer. On the other hand, when it's a complex job and their in-house resources can't handle it, that's when they'll get other people involved, and they know they're going to have the budget to do that. Just once you get another engineer, a third-party engineer on board, it's going to cost a lot of money. So you got to be very selective with that, and it's budget driven for sure.
Yeah, but when we talk to engineers, it's it's not like they have it easy. Right? Like a good engineer will go out into the field and like do some field investigation. Like you said, look at what not in a two-dimensional view, so to speak, but a lot of times they don't get all the information, and they need to go gather it, especially when we're talking about as-built and utility records. Like a lot of times, if I needed to drive 6 hours to get that record for some I don't know, godforsaken basement in the outskirts of a town that no one's ever heard of. Right? Like we've heard these stories, and then they need to design off of this as-built that's been hasn't been may have been changed or hasn't been changed in the last 30 years, right? And have they found the most recent as-built of that area? They never know.
Right.
They never know.
Well, and I think too, a lot of engineering firms are starting to hire contractors who have actually done the work. In the past, engineers they're very, I don't know, it's like a secret society. They definitely want to keep everything in a vacuum. And if you're not an engineer, you're not even going to be considered. You got to have a PE stamp in order to get on their team. Yeah. I think they're starting to see the reality that, there's knowledge and there's wisdom. And it's the contractors, the guys that you would think that, just because they don't have a degree doesn't mean, they're not smart. Those are the ones that if I had my druthers, I'd rather be with the contractors, because I'm not going to get killed with a contractor. When I'm with an engineer, he's going to get you killed on a job site because he just doesn't know. Yeah. So there's a lot of expertise that are coming from the field, from contracting, that can help designers get that information that they need. Now, a lot of it can be local knowledge. A lot of it can be just simply going out there and doing a bunch of exploratory work, potholing, vac truck work, that type of thing. Pulling lids off of manholes and inlets. Those things, you can connect the dots that way. I know that there are far more sophisticated methods to get from point A to point B, but I think designers and design firms are looking to hire contractors because they're starting to see that there's some value in their expertise, whether it's from having local experience or just knowing how to connect those dots that a typical engineer wouldn't know how to do or wouldn't even know where to start. So, yeah, for sure, the industry is starving for more high-tech methods. I know that as-builts are very fallible. We get lazy when we sign off on a project. Typically, when you're delivering as-builts on a completed project, it's at the very end. Obviously, you're constantly doing these changes throughout the project. But to get it through the submittal process, the first few submittals are great. They're pretty accurate. But when you drag on a project 2, 3, 4 years, I've been there. I've been a field engineer. You're submitting. If it's close, fine. If it's not, who cares? That's just keeping it real. And so what happens is it starts extrapolating into that error zone where you could call for a utility dig, and utility alert, and they go out there and they mark it, and they, let's say for example, they give you a 2 or 5 foot offset from center line. I mean, I've been on jobs that wasn't even close. It wasn't even within that. And again, those are great change order opportunities for a contractor. But again, the owner's not looking to honor all these change orders. When they hand it off to an engineer, they want them to have the data, take the risk, so that the contractor's not coming back to them wanting more money. So those are the things. I mean, it's kind of like, if you're doing a project at home, it could be something as simple as a ceiling fan. I know that the scope of work is going to be, hey, hang the ceiling fan up on the ceiling and make sure it works from a switch. But there could be a lot of things in between there when you're starting to do that you didn't see, that becomes a complex project. Well, let's say that the wiring wasn't right. Now that's got to be fixed, or is a bad switch, or is a three-way switch and it doesn't work, the pole's off, or whatever. If I'm paying somebody to do that, I don't want to get charged extra for changing out a switch. The scope of work was to put in a ceiling fan. So as an owner, or as somebody I'm hiring to put in a ceiling fan, I'm shocked if somebody comes back, if the guy I hired comes back and he wants double the price to put up a ceiling fan because of all this other stuff, whether it's legitimized or not. So that's why an owner is like, look, I just want to make sure you guys have the right data, you know what you're doing, and then I'm not writing checks after the fact. Once that money's gone, I'm moving on to the next project. I've got buckets of money for other projects and I'm not going to dip into. So that's really the challenge. And that's why you get all this adverse relationships out in the field, because the owner's mad at the engineer's mad at the contractor, and the contractor's mad at everybody. So again, getting the right data is very important. And, it doesn't seem like it's important on the front end because you're so excited just to bid a job and have the opportunity to go out and perform. But on the back end is where you wish that you had better data, because either the contractor's losing money, he's an LDs, or the engineer, he's like a lawyer and he can't bill any more hours because he's been hosing the owner from day one. And then the owner's just like, man, I'm going broke and I got to go to the city council and beg for more money. So you can see that everybody's friends at the beginning of the project, and at the end it's pretty rough. And that's why, hence that was the invention of partnering, 20, 25 years ago, because they wanted to prevent all this back end arbitration and try to get it rectified in the front end, so everybody's happy and part of a family on the front end, and hopefully you can get to the end of the project without a divorce.
Well, it's it sounds like on one hand all the stakeholders in the project are adversarial, and on the other hand everyone's making a buck out of this except for the taxpayers.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm a taxpayer, and when I'm out there and I'm seeing how much money it takes to do these projects, or watching, a lot of these projects go over budget. I mean, I've been on both sides. I've seen projects just kill it and make a ton of money, and I've seen projects just bleed. I mean, you can go on YouTube, and there's actually a clip of, there's about 10 mega projects that didn't do so well. The Bay Bridge in the Bay Area is a great example. I think that went, it doubled in budget. Wow. And a lot of those, part of the reasoning was, design and obstructions, things that, the alignment was off. It could have been rectified in design. It could have been rectified prior to even bringing a designer over. The owner could have done a better job at figuring out what their surroundings were before they even picked that particular alignment to put that bridge in. So, it's kind of like, you make a mistake, you're on the wrong trajectory. It could be a half a degree off, but by the time that you get 1,000 miles down the road, you're 30 degrees off. I mean, you're messed up. So, there's a lot of that going on, but I've seen it both ways. And I know that, again, I try every time that I get involved in a public works project to be cognizant of taxpayer dollars, because I'm writing the check too. And we owe it to be better stewards of our own money. And I guarantee you, if you own the company, you would never you'd never behave the way that you do if you didn't have that context, you didn't have that perspective. If you just thought that I don't own it, so I'm just going to do whatever I want to do. Once you start, you know, branching out on your own and trying to do it on your own, you start to respect what an owner does and the risk that they take. And it can be an owner of a utility, it can be an owner of a construction company, it can be an owner of a design firm. I mean, my hat's off to those people because I tried too. You can burn through a lot of money trying to get off the ground. You take a lot of risk. So, I get it. It's good to make a profit. We all want to make a dollar. But at the same token, it's about relationships. I mean, you can sell your soul for one project. Contractors do it all the time just to make a name so that they can look impressive on the bottom line for one job and maybe get a bonus.
Yeah.
But how many relationships have you screwed up in the process? And people remember you. It's a very small world in construction. And I tell people, look, I'm not going to sell my soul on this one job. I'm going to be around for 20 years. Because you always remember the bad things about people and about projects. You never remember the good things. So that's one of the things that keeps me cognizant of saving money, being cognizant of money, being a good steward of money. And it doesn't matter where I'm at in that food chain and who my client is, whether it's an owner, designer, or a contractor.
Well, I wish that more people, more stakeholders in the industry would uh, feel like that. I think that, like you said before, it's like we're an industry of frenemies. Like on one hand, we must be able to work with each other, but on the other hand, there's a lot of finger pointing, which I think is a lot of what you just described.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes what I do now so much more valuable because um, I take the emotion out of the projects, but it really helps me to maintain objectivity. When you're working for a company, you become very subjective. It's all about you. You get kind of lost in the weeds because you're just thinking, I want the benefits and I want to survive and I need the paycheck, et cetera, et cetera. But when you own your own company and you consult to a lot of these clients, if you do a good job, number one, it's just pride of ownership. That's what you should be doing anyway. But your client is going to recognize that too. They know that there's a certain level of integrity. When you're an employee, I'm not saying you don't have integrity, but that gets kind of grayed up and kind of smeared into the mass of the corporation.
There's
Um,
more interest at stake.
well, I think there's a lot of people that are internally sabotaging, your environment and your career because there's this hierarchy that people are constantly aware of.
Yeah.
So, like you said, frenemies. The politics and the drama in a corporation. Just the gossip and all the subplots. Yeah, there are a lot of people that it's fun to them when they get into that. I guess it makes time pass. I don't know, but I'm more of a person that has a passion for construction, and I want people to succeed. The only way they're going to succeed is to get from point A to point B as quick as possible, and to be aware again of the budgets, whether it's the budget to estimate, the budget to perform the work, to construct the work, to maintain the work, all those things. And if you don't have that objective knowledge, that well-rounded knowledge, you get very myopic in just where you're at, what's your seat. I mean, you want to be good at what you do, but at the same token, you want people around you to be good as well, because you're only as good as the weakest link. And for us here at Jones Industrial, that's really how we carry ourselves, because I'm not going to get any phone calls. If the client's not happy with my work, I'm not going to get a phone call. And it can be stuff that I've been doing for 28 years, just grinding through a takeoff. I'm a grinder. I actually enjoy it because I know nobody else is going to want to do it. And when they do it, especially in utility work, you get so burned out, you'll start taking shortcuts, or you'll start, slacking off a little bit and not providing the detail that you need to give to a customer. It's a very competitive world. The only way that you can get a competitive advantage is you have the right data. You've got to be detailed. You can't just, get in a hurry and make some gross assumptions and just whitewash it and get through it. Um, some of the best jobs are the ones that I really grind into it and get into the details so the customer knows exactly what they're getting into, especially when you don't have all the accurate data when it comes to underground infrastructure work. And if you can provide all that information to, a contractor, help them in the bid process, they can get an advantage over their competitor because they've got the data. What they do with the data is up to them. I take the emotion out of it. Here's the data. You guys run with it or not run with it. But I guarantee you they're going to call me back because if they need to go to the next level of detail, they're going to call me. They're going to call our team. And that's what I like about it because there's not a lot of people that can still do this for as long as I have and not get burned out. They typically will want to go to a vice president level where they can kind of chill and delegate and just talk a lot. And outside of this podcast, I don't like to really hear myself talk. So,
Yeah, I think that we've heard the term guesstimate. We heard that being used.
oh yeah,
So, and I think I sometimes can't believe when I hear it being used. And we hear this and these are not small projects. Yeah, we made this, we guesstimated this part of the design. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean?
yeah. Well, I mean that's part of your your risk assessment. I mean, you can have a conversation with a group of people at a restaurant at the table and say, well, how much do you think this is going to cost me? Well, that's going to run you about $150,000, linear foot. Let's say it's a people mover project or something. There's metrics that you can use where you're like, it's 150. And they're like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, well, that's great from 60,000 feet. But, if it's my money, I'm the owner of the company and I'm taking the risk, I don't want to bid anything at 60,000 feet. Even if it's conceptual. I mean, it's good. Again, it's good to have a conversation about it. But for people just to operate kind of on a green sheet mentality where you just, we've done this in the past for, X amount of dollars per foot or per yard or whatever the case may be. And let's just run it on a spreadsheet, put some overhead and profit on it and turn it in. We're good to go. We've been doing this for 20 years. And I got to tell you that with the volatility of the markets in the last 2 years, that's out the window. You can't do that anymore. So for people to say, yeah, we kind of guesstimated on it, we gave it a wag, that works in only specific instances. But again, you've got to mitigate your risk. I'm never going to, volunteer a wag or a guess to my client because I don't want them looking at me like, hey, it's your fault. What I've got error and emissions insurance or not. That's not relevant. What's relevant is if, as a consultant, do I advise my clients to do that and then put their money at risk like that? Absolutely not. So for an estimating department to do it, I hope they're just being facetious and joking, but today you can't do that. I mean, especially with materials the way they are, supply chain issues, things have gone up. I've had to change a lot of my own metrics that I relied on. So my conversations have changed with owners. I can't just pull a rabbit out of a hat with a bunch of numbers that I've had and I've been using for the past 20 years. So yeah, those things, I mean, it's nice in conversation, but in conversation only. When the rubber hits the road and somebody's got to back it up, I think you're starting to see more of a demand for this detail. And again, that's what gives me the job security and our team job security. So we're loving it here.
I think I think we're seeing a lot of this on the front end because there's just a lack of data at that point, and creating data at the early stages of design is expensive. Like going back into utilities, like when you're 18 months away from the excavator on site, you're not going to be inclined in investing six figures in a field investigation crew to go out into the field because you don't even know yet if the project is going to happen. So you're only going to make that investment when you get towards construction, which creates again a lack of data and kind of I'm not blaming the engineers. I'm saying, look, this is a tough situation that they need to deal with. They need to deal with a lack of data where they're at in the project.
Yeah, and I think that there are ways to to mitigate that. Everything's about cash flow, obviously. So to your point, you just can't spend a ton of money on the front end. But if you're in the process of bidding work, you can identify a lot of potential on the front end that would substantiate going out and spending some money to do your investigations, to maybe buy equipment or buy software that can be helpful in forecasting what your potential change orders are going to be. What are your windfalls going to be? Those things are case by case. They're going to be job specific. So yes, I mean I think that everybody's cognizant, especially on the front end. You just don't want to start writing checks, especially if it's something that, I mean, obviously you don't want to do that when you don't even have the job. You want to wait until the ink's dried and you've got a job. But even
Yeah.
times when you do have a job, you got to adhere to your schedule and, stick to your schedule, have schedule discipline. And two, I think you have to evaluate, your 80/20 rule is just what's moving the needle? What's that 80% that's going to really ding me if I don't pay attention to it? Not
Yeah.
saying that 20% is not important, but that's your starting point. Because sometimes your 20% can get critical and almost flip flop on you if you go to sleep on it. So
Yeah.
yeah, not to let the 20% fall through the cracks, but you have to identify that big chunk, that big nut that's going to hit you hard, and how you're going to attack it all the way through the job, whether it's front end, in the middle, on the back end. Obviously, you're trying to put yourself in a strategic situation where you want to overbill on the front end, and that way you can be your own bank and play with house money, that type of thing. Probably not telling you anything you don't already know.
Sid, towards the end of our episode, we normally ask two questions. So I'll start with the first one. What's one piece of advice you'd give to estimators going into complex infrastructure projects?
I would say detail. The more detail, the better. And I think that if you think that the people you're working for or the client, your employer is not looking for detail, you're fooling yourself. More information is better than not enough. Just getting by is not going to cut it. I know that utility work, infrastructure work, buried utilities, it's not very sexy. It's buried. You don't get to see it. But when you put the detail into it, it can have everything to do with the success of everything that you can see. So I would say with my advice for that is more detail. Go the extra mile. Again, I know it's a grind, but it's well worth it. And I think that that's going to benefit everybody in the loop, from the owner to the contractor to the engineer to yourself. Because when somebody's going to ask the question sooner or later, you got to have the answer.
Yeah. Second question. I'm putting you on the spot for a second. Who do you think should be our next guest on the podcast?
Who should be your next guest?
Next guest.
Oh my. Somebody that I would know, or somebody that I would recommend to you?
That you know, preferably like, and most importantly is that you think is a professional that needs to share their point of view.
I always like to yield to my business partner. Um, I'm kind of biased that way because we got into business together because we share the same values. We're like minded in the detail approach. Um, you want me to drop his name? Is that what you're looking for, David?
Absolutely.
No, my business partner is Todd Jackson, and he has his own consulting company, but we joint venture uh, as part of Jones Industrial Group. We have a subsidiary, J2W Enterprises, and Todd Jackson is actually the owner of Waterloo Preconstruction Services. And he's again, you're probably gonna hear a lot of the same mantra that I have from him, which is good because that's why when you get two people, two heads are better than one, and
Definitely.
you've got to seek these people out that have that same level of integrity because you can. And we've all worked with people that when they say something that it sounds good, it sounds like something that you want to hear, but what you're looking for is the action part. Are the actions what I want to see?
Yeah.
And so if you can find somebody like that, and it's going to be rare. I've been in the business for again close to 30 years. Just on the professional standpoint, I've been in the field prior to that. But it's taken that long to find somebody that you would take on mutually shared risk. And even what we do as consultants, I mean, we're sharing risk because, again, you're only as good as the weakest link. And if the two of you are right there together, I mean, you could be a juggernaut, especially in this market that we're in right now. And there is a shortage. My wife for many years was an employment recruiter, and trust me, I've seen some resumes. I've seen a lot of them. She's seen a lot of them. I've seen what's out there. I see what the demand is from a lot of these companies. Even at Jones Industrial, she still recruits for us, and I just know that there's a demand for quality that's just not there in this market. So when you can hook up with people that are like minded, yeah, for sure, he's definitely a recommendation for a conversation with you.
So we'll have to take that offline and then make that happen.
Yeah.
Sid, thank you so much. This was a very informative episode. I think our audience got a lot of value out of it, and I appreciate it.
My pleasure, David. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to talking real soon.
Sure thing.